the Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network presents Worldview Media Podcast, where Gordon and Joyce Runyon view popular media through the lens of the biblical five-point covenant model to help believers appreciate and apply principles of exciting narrative and engaging storytelling.
And welcome to another edition of the Worldview Media Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Runyon, famous for a face made for radio and a voice made for pantomime. And with me in the studio is a woman who was definitely not raised as a spoiled brat. My wife, Joyce.
Some might disagree with you.
I wondered if you would fess up to that. Your mom tried to spoil you, I think.
My siblings might say she succeeded.
Well, we're doing something a little bit different today. We're talking about the chocolate factory owned by Willie Wonka.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did is we watched both versions of this show. We watched the original with Gene Wilder called Willie Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yep.
And then we watched the more modern remake by Tim Burton called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
Now, they both follow the same book, the same novel.
Yeah.
However, loosely.
Well, I didn't read the book, so I don't know how loose it was.
Well, neither do I. I'm saying there was enough different between them that one or the other of them was obviously not following it too closely.
Yeah.
And we were curious to see if the decades in between the making of those movies would show up in a worldview way. As the culture has changed, would it be evident? Yeah, would it be evident there?
Yeah.
And I think what happened is we found that probably there was less of a change than there might have been if what the second movie was doing was simply remaking the first. But if they were interpreting the same book in their own way, then that's going to kind of make the differences a little bit smaller. That was my take on it.
Mm.
Anyway, so talk about your overall impressions and which of the two versions did you like the best?
Well, they're both kind of cheesy. You got to say that up front. And for me, I think the more modern version was a little bit more cheesy to me. I think it tried to be humorous in spots, and it missed it. I think it just missed it. It wasn't just me thinking, oh, that's not funny. I mean, it was just like, that didn't work. I know what you're trying to do here, but that just didn't work. And for me, I really liked the original better. I didn't think I would, but it is a musical, so there's a lot of music that goes on it. There's a lot of different characters that sing. You don't really have that in the second movie. It's mostly just the Oompa Loompas that are singing, and I think that there was more of a clear moral in the first movie, because I think with all the songs that they did about the kids when they got into trouble and bad stuff happened, they were addressing specific issues that I think was just current to that time, issues you had with raising kids and being spoiled, or being gluttonous and eating everything, and chewing gum like a cow, and there was just I thought it was clever. I really did see it as a more clever movie than the second one.
I think I kind of agreed with you. I feel like in the first movie, Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka was just eccentric, and in the one with Johnny Depp, they took eccentric to a kind of outlandish level. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of with you. Maybe what they were trying to do was make it more comedic, but it just wound up being kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, and then it brings out a whole nother thing that wasn't in the first one with the family of Willie, and it seems just kind of weird too. His dad's a dentist and he can't have candy, and so that's really what he wants. He wants the candy, and so he must leave, and so it was just kind of weird.
Right.
The dad saying, well, if you leave, I won't be here when you get back. And, he comes back and the house is literally gone. And you're going, okay, yeah, that's right. So it was a little too much for me.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure it was a great move to have Tim Burton be the director of the remake, simply because everything he does kind of looks the same. He's got his own flavor and feel, and it winds up being very unrealistic looking, where the walls of the house are at a weird angle, and everything just looks off kilter, and I'm not sure that's what we could have gone for there. There was enough weirdness apparently in the book that I think they could have just gone with that and been all right, like the first movie did.
Yeah.
With all four grandparents sleeping in one bed.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some different things about the story. But I hadn't realized that about stylistically, but you're right, that he does tend to have his own perspective that he puts over his settings and his scenery, but I don't think I really saw that in the Chocolate Factory. Oh. I mean, and it was just that one house. I think everything else was pretty much normal. It looked like just any type of suburban area. So.
Yeah. Well, maybe so. The place where I saw a little bit of a difference, and you probably can't help it, but the new movie obviously relied more on special effects than the old one did, and I guess the thing that surprised me, there's a scene in both movies where they go from the main entrance of the factory on the tour and they board a boat, and then they have a weird wild ride to the next place that they're going to go in both the movies. And I was kind of surprised at how dark and foreboding the ride was in the first movie.
Yeah, there were some images there that I was like, what?
Right, it looked like there was, for no reason, it looked like during the first ride, there's a clip of, like, a chicken getting its head cut off.
Yeah. And you go, what?
Right, and no real explanation for what that was for. It was just obviously supposed to be weird and unsettling.
Frightening, yes. Yeah, that was weird.
And I was kind of surprised how dark that particular bit of it was. And the other thing that I noticed, and I'm not sure why they did it, is they eliminated the new movie eliminated the whole concept of Willy Wonka sending a guy to pose as a rival who's going to pay the children to cheat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they just got rid of that completely, and the whole plot involving the everlasting gobstoppers and stuff was done away. And I'm not sure. Maybe they got rid of that so they'd have time to do the family backstory or something.
Well, and I thought that the first movie, it was compelling with all the kids because they went in flawed. And even Charlie, who was supposed to be probably the best kid there, even he went in and made a mistake. And that didn't happen in the second movie.
Right.
He wasn't at fault in anything. He just, finally he was the last kid standing, and so you win. And so I think to me that was a little disappointing, because I think it meant something for him to have made the mistake and then said, I'm sorry. I did do some stuff that was wrong and I shouldn't have done, and I'm sorry.
Right.
And so that was, I missed that piece of it.
Yeah, and the things seemed to change from in the first Charlie, or the first Willy Wonka, I should say, was looking for a kid who had been raised right by his parents. And the second Willie Wonka seemed to be shocked that any such thing could happen, that a parent could raise a kid right. And that was a little bit different. Now he gets set straight at the end, and he comes to some kind of resolution with his own dad, who treated him harshly and all that. But that was a little bit of a change. At first, Willie Wonka knew he was looking for a kid who had good enough parents to not raise a brat. Mm-hmm. And in the second one, like I say, he sounded kind of shocked at the end that, wow, you were raised right by parents? How could this be?
Well, and I think, too, that, family wasn't anything that was important to the second Willie. And saw it more as a burden than,
Stifling
something to be, something that was good and could be wholesome and benefit a child. So there were definitely some differences between the two movies.
Well, I think we both wind up in the same place then. I think I'd trade the slicker special effects for the directorial sensibilities of the first movie, where they kind of played it more straight, and the only weirdness was really kind of in Gene Wilder's eyes sometimes,
Yeah.
And so I think Tim Burton maybe went a little bit, into his own space with some of that. Maybe leaned a little bit too much on set decoration and costuming and stuff. I was disappointed the Oompa Loompas didn't still have orange faces.
Well, and I think it was really just the same guy that they superimposed over everything.
There's one guy.
Yeah. So there were some things that were maybe just trying to be clever. I don't know, but it missed the mark. And I think that was the overwhelming response by the public when it was released, that this isn't quite what we were hoping for.
Right.
Because Johnny Depp really is, I think he's a talented actor. And I think sometimes they give him a little bit too much leeway, or they, I don't know. Yeah. But I usually like Johnny Depp. I think he does some really good characters. Yeah,
he seems to choose, a lot of the time he chooses characters that are a bit left of center in terms of just, they're off kilter, like Tim Burton's angles on the house.
Yeah.
Even his most famous character, Captain Jack in Pirates, he's a weird guy,
Unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that's about all we have to say about how we felt in an overall sort of sense. Did you like one of the Charlies better? Or?
Just overall, I have to go with the first movie for everything, because Charlie's lacking. I mean, it's nice that he says, no, I'm going to stay with my family.
Right.
And you look at where he lives, and that's what he's choosing. But I just think the other one is more genuine. The first one is more genuine. Yeah. It's more honest, looking at how people are. It's not just kids that are like that. People are like that. It's adults that raise these kids that look like themselves.
Right. Well, I'd be the same way. I think the first Charlie, they did a better job in subtle ways of showing you that he could have been selfish and could have been greedy for things that he didn't have, and instead was generous. All right, well, let's stop and take our break, and we'll get back and speak more specifically about worldview. Back in a bit.
The Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network brings to you a complete lineup of podcasts where you will hear practical and tactical theology. Our desire is not simply that you consume our shows, but that you also live out your faith in every area of life. We can talk all day long about these things, but if we fail to put them into practice, then we fail as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, our King. Subscribe now to your favorite Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network shows, or you can subscribe to the Reconstructionist Radio Master Feed, where all of the content we produce, including the audiobooks and audio articles, will pop up as soon as they are available. And don't forget to visit reconstructionistradio.com to volunteer as a narrator or to partner with this ministry financially. May the Holy Spirit stir you into action for Christ and His kingdom.
And we're back. We were gone so long. Okay, here's the point where we're going to kind of compare and contrast in terms of the 5-point covenant model. And since, like I say, the two movies were both basing their plots on the same book, a lot of these points are the same. So we might just talk about things that we saw that were different, or that'll be what we kind of try to highlight. But the first point of the biblical covenant is transcendence. And I'm not sure we see a whole lot transcendence-wise, except that I think transcendence does get represented, and that's part of the covenant. That's actually part 2. So if we can kind of skip over part 1 and talk about how is transcendence represented, I kind of feel like it's interesting that I don't feel like either movie that Willie Wonka is the representative of the transcendent power, whatever that is, but I do think that he's the foil and the catalyst that causes the representative to shine, or he's the dividing line, so to speak, that you'll fall on one side of Willy Wonka and you're obviously not representing the transcendence. Fall on the other side and you are. And so I think in both instances it winds up being that the bratty kids and their parents fall on the wrong side, and then Charlie and his grandpa fall on the other. And what I mean is, I think that because of the tests that they get put in by Willy Wonka, they kind of wind up standing out and showing their virtue in relation to the other brats that are there. So I guess it's tough because I don't think that Willy Wonka is the transcendent power, but he's close because he does seem to have kind of magical abilities to be sovereign over everything that happens in his place. And in fact, in the more recent movie, they kind of make a few remarks about the fact that how could these songs already be written about the fates of these children before they came in. And so there's obviously something weird going on there, but they don't explore that very much. I guess I would say that Willy Wonka, if he does represent transcendence, he does it in kind of the same way that Mr. Rourke did in Fantasy Island. You know, there's a lesson to be taught, and he's the conduit by which that lesson will be taught. Yeah,
I guess I could agree with that.
Even if I almost got the sense in the second one, maybe he didn't even know what the lesson was at times. But he was still the one that was going to teach it. So that's kind of weird. So something beyond Charlie and something beyond Willy Wonka, I think is obviously there. But that's kind of tough. Who's the real representative? I think it winds up being Charlie because he's standing out and showing the virtue of things like generosity, and in the second movie then love and family loyalty and stuff like that. What do you think?
I probably agree with you for the most part. In the first movie, though, Charlie was a brat. He just wasn't caught. Him and his grandpa.
Well, they did one bratty thing.
Well, everybody else did one bratty thing too, and it eliminated them from the running. So that, you know, Charlie he didn't go through it and come out flawless. You know, he had his faults, and he fell, and he just, they thought they got away with it.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, you know, because they got to the end, they said, okay, where's our prize?
Yeah.
And that's when he says, no, you don't get a prize because of this. And, you know, nobody was in there.
Right.
It was just the two of them. And so I can kind of see what you're saying about Willie being the conduit. But in a sense, he's the one that knows these things, you know.
Okay.
So
He almost is transcendent.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. But I think he's kind of an icon, though. He stands for something else, is I guess what I'm trying to say. I don't think I don't think the movie's making him out to be a god, especially the first movie wasn't. But he does stand for something.
Yeah.
It seems to me.
Well, and I think you see that with the way the kids, with the little songs that are done after each of the kids have their issue and their problem where they fail. So there's some moral things going on there, because it talks about, you know, eating too much and being pretty much like a pig, or, you know, not having good manners and thinking about the people that are around you, or, you know, just wanting everything that you see, and being covetous. I need to have this because I see this and I don't have it, and so I must have it now. And that all of these things, they're still very relevant to our society, because that's what people do, and that's who people are. And, you know, that's just the way it is. Without Christ in your life, you're going to fall and you're going to fail, and these things are going to suck you in, and you're going to be out with the garbage. You're going to be a bad egg, you know?
Right. Well, that kind of gets us into talking about ethics and what were the moral dilemmas that were faced. And the movie really felt like an extended parable, really, because you have this first man did this and it turned out bad. The second one did this and it turned out bad. And finally Charlie did this and it turned out better, and he got the prize. So it felt like an extended parable, and the kids, like you say, there was one that was a glutton, and he gets in trouble for his gluttony, and he winds up, he's probably going to be melted with the fudge.
Yeah.
Right. And in Willy Wonka's world, to be melted in the fudge or with the fudge, that's kind of a hellish sort of metaphor.
Doesn't sound
there.
good, yeah.
And then there was the greedy girl who wanted everything that she wanted, and she winds up going down in the garbage chute. And what happens to the garbage? Well, it gets incinerated. And,
yeah.
that doesn't sound good. And then there was the girl. It was kind of funny. They chose to change the bratty habit of the one girl. In the first movie, her bratty habit was just that she was chewing gum like a cow constantly. And then in the second movie, I guess they figured that wasn't enough, and so in addition to chewing cows like gum, in addition.
Chewing cows like gum? Maybe chewing gum like cows?
Yeah, so in addition to that, they decided to make her like really assertive, and she's a winner, and she's gonna get every trophy and win every contest.
Yeah.
And then you have the bratty girl whose father was the rich guy, and she demanded that he buy her everything that she wanted. And then you have the other kid who was really into television, and in the newer movie he was really into video games and computer tech and stuff. And what I thought was, so those are all ethical dilemmas. Will these kids get out of that, or will their brattiness wind up destroying them? And I thought it was interesting that like I say, they had to add to the chewing gum girl to make her seem even more bratty. But in the first movie, they made the point that, I think in the song they said something like, chewing gum once in a while, that's fine, but when you're chewing gum all day long like a cow, that's just impolite. And,
Yeah.
and I note that our culture doesn't put as much stock these days in politeness and manners.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I ran into a book a long time ago that was, it kind of had the cloth covered cardboard cover, the hardcover, but it was, the old kind of book that was, the hardcover was cloth.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I do.
and anyway, it was a book about manners.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout it didn't mention this, it didn't advertise this, but as I was reading through it just for curiosity's sake, it was putting manners in the category of Christian love toward your neighbor. And it was making the point that having good manners and being polite is like the first lowest step on the ladder toward loving your neighbor. If you can't be polite toward people, how are you going to convince me that you're loving them? And
well, that's interesting, but I think it's really very valid. They're really very valid. Yeah, sure.
And so you train your children to be polite. You're training them in the first baby steps toward loving your neighbor. And so I noted then that...
Well, it's not just being polite. I think it's also an issue of respect.
Having consideration.
And understanding your place in society.
Yeah.
That there are things and people who are above me that
children
I need
are supposed to act a certain way.
That I need to regard and,
Right. Yeah, the other thing that was interesting is that although it wasn't stated anywhere, kind of a common failing among the brats was a disrespect for their parents.
Yeah.
And that was, as far as I saw, that was never highlighted. It was almost treated like, well, the parents trained them to be this way. And I'm sure they did, but it's still wrong. It's still evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the big moral dilemma that Charlie faced was just the same as what the other kids did. You've got this gigantic, unimaginable prize in front of you, and will you allow your own lusts and appetites to destroy you, or will you use some self-restraint and even generosity in order to finally attain that prize? And like you mentioned, Charlie and his granddad do mess up in the first movie, but they kind of wind up apologizing for that, right? At the end, and the others did what they did with a great deal of defiance.
Yeah, went down with the ship.
They sinned with a high hand, as the King James would have said it. So I thought that was interesting. And then there was in the newer movie, it was an additional moral dilemma for Charlie because he was offered the company like in the first movie, but he can't see his parents again, or he can't see his family ever again. And that was an additional moral dilemma. And what's he going to do? And of course he chooses his family and to forego the giant treasure and all that. And so that was interesting. And obviously, the makers of the movie considered that the noble choice. And so that was good.
Well, and then with that, when Charlie said, no, I can't go with you. And then Willie's in talking to the Oompa guy and saying, well, I just don't understand what's going on. My candy's terrible. And my candy's never been terrible. And it's because I feel bad. So because I feel bad, I'm making bad candy. And so I just thought, oh, that's interesting, that we're going to let our feelings sway us and change our recipes, I'm thinking, well, don't you have a recipe for all these candies you're making that they shouldn't quality control? You're feeling bad. That's probably sad, but things go on and continue. So I didn't know. I thought that was just an interesting statement for them to make in the movie.
Yeah, I felt like there was a little bit more magical involvement in the second movie than in the first. There were times when weird things happened in the first movie, of course, like all the fates of all the bad children. But I felt like there was a little bit more magic like that involved in the second movie. And so the candy Willie Wonka makes is more a reflection of what's going on inside him than, real candy recipes or anything like that.
Well, I guess so. I guess so.
But really, one of the central things in the movie is kind of point 4 of the covenant sanctions and asking, does everybody get what their actions deserve in the confines of the way that the movie world is set up. And I think that's kind of the whole point, is to show these brats kind of getting what they deserve, and their parents too, really. And
yeah,
I think the second movie even makes the point that the fault of the brat is the parent,
Yeah. Can that be possible?
Who takes credit? Who should get credit for the bratty kid? It's the parent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the brats do get what they deserve. Charlie winds up getting what he deserves, and
Well, yes and no.
He gets more than he deserves.
He gets more than he deserves.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, especially in the first movie.
Sure, gets a giant prize he would have never imagined.
Well, because he messed up, so
right.
What he should have got was nothing.
Right, there was more grace involved in the second movie. Where the older movie. Right. That's true. There was more grace involved in that. And let's see. So the fifth point of the biblical covenant is succession, and how is this arrangement going to continue? And I think in both movies we're led to believe that Willie Wonka is passing on the whole magical world to Charlie, who clearly has many decades in which to be the captain of this new world and do what he wants with it and bring his family in. And this is where his family's fortunes are going to vastly improve. And so there was that, at least, that it looks like the way the movie ends up, it looks like happily ever after,
Yeah. Well, and there's a big difference between the two with the kids that got into the trouble, because we never see them revisited in the first movie.
Right.
They're gone. And in the second movie, you see them come out and they're walking out. Right. And hopefully they have changed, but it's questionable. Right. It's questionable.
I'm not sure they have. Yeah.
If these bad experiences has taught them anything, so.
Yeah.
But you see them, the one girl's still blue, but very flexible.
She has no more bones, right? And the kid that was shrunk has been stretched like taffy.
And he's thin and tall, and and then the one covered in trash, and the other one covered in chocolate, and don't eat yourself, but I taste so good.
Right. So really, I think this was the first time that I've ever seen the Gene Wilder
Really?
movie. Yeah, that was my first viewing of it.
Wow.
And I was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
I know Gene Wilder and what kind of actor
Crazy,
he is. And I guess the thing that surprised me is, I mentioned it before, I was a little bit surprised at how dark it was at times. With the chicken getting his head cut off and other things like that in that montage sequence. There were some dark images going in there. And I thought, in terms of pure acting and who did the best job as Willy Wonka, I'd give it to Gene Wilder, hands down. Especially the couple of times when the bad kid runs off to do what he shouldn't do, and Gene Wilder's kind of sitting there saying, "Wait, don't, come back," rolling his eyes.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny. So I guess overall, I'd give the first movie a slightly higher grade than the second one, and really, it's even the first one's not a bad movie in terms of overall message and what kind of moral, ethical, judicial lessons are taught.
Yeah.
It's really a pretty decent worldview sort of movie.
Yeah, it really isn't too bad. Plus, it's got some nice songs. I don't think
Right.
I like the songs. And familiar, you'll say, "Oh, that's
Is that where that
yeah.
comes from?" Right.
And then the second movie, the songs were just kind of a little too techno. I mean, they were just weird. They didn't have the same type of message as the first one.
Hard to understand the lyrics.
Yeah, so...
The Oompa Loompa songs, I thought the fact that you missed those in the second movie, that's kind of rough.
Yeah.
Because they were just funny in the first movie.
They were, and then
Right.
not only did they sing them, but they would have the words come up on the screen too, so that you would catch what they were saying. And so
Right.
it was really very good.
Right. Okay, well, do you have anything else to add about this movie? Anything to get off your chest?
No, I don't think so. I did like the first movie, the
Yeah,
Wilder movie, better than the Depp movie.
right. Me too. We're agreed. That's why our marriage has lasted.
That's why. Well, it's a good thing we finally saw them then.
Right.
It's all over now. I'm sorry.
Oh, dear. All right. Well, very good. So, we've decided we've got the golden tickets for marriage and life here. So we're all set. We're going to leave. Leaving on the note that what we watch and how we entertain ourselves is important. It's all part of God's kingdom, and Christ is in charge. And we really need to learn, not just with movies, but with everything we do, how to apply the biblical covenant as a lens to evaluate all these things. So we hope this has been helpful as we go through these movies and just kind of ask worldview covenant questions, and hopefully it will give you some guide or help as you seek to do the same in your life. So praise God, we're done. It's another week.
Yay!
Are you glad to be done?
I'm always glad.
100%.
100%. But then the thing is, it's like laundry.
It just keeps coming.
Starts over.
There's another one. Right. All right. Next week, y'all. We'll see you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Worldview Media Podcast. Please visit reconstructionistradio.com to check out the other podcasts in our network and to download our free audiobooks.